Questions. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Jerry Piquequot was just 42 years old. He was homeless since being cut off social assistance, so he was using a broken-down semi-trailer on the 500 block of Avenue K South in Saskatoon as his shelter. On Friday night, with the temperature at minus 28 degrees with the wind chill, Jerry died in that makeshift shelter. My question is for the Deputy Premier. Will he call an inquest into the circumstances that led to this tragic death, including the government's decision to cut Jerry Piquequot off social assistance, despite the fact that he was desperate and homeless? When will this government finally implement a province-wide Housing First strategy to help some of the most vulnerable citizens in our province?
Sandra Brown runs the Métis Housing Group in Lloydminster, and she says, and I quote, "Up until the Saskatchewan Party was elected, Saskatchewan Housing Corporation was a leader, innovative across this country. The Saskatchewan Party has diminished the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation to the point where they're almost ineffective." End of quote. To the Minister, how can this government justify diminishing Saskatchewan Housing Corporation to a point where those who are on the front lines say it's almost ineffective?
Families and communities that have crowded, run-down classrooms and not enough classrooms shouldn't have to pay more than everybody else to get enough class space for their kids. A community that needs a school should get a school, period, Mr. Speaker.
An email we've obtained from the head of the provincial Kaizen Promotion Office shows that John Black rakes in over $173,500 for every single field trip.
Now, if they were intent on plowing ahead and signing the contract, Mr. Speaker, I have problems with that. But they could have at least listened to ministry officials, listened to the Kaizen Promotion Office, and cut out the John Black World Tour North American Kaizen field trip. $200,000 a pop. Why didn't the minister, why did this government use some common sense, actually save some money, and actually put it where it counts, on the front lines?
We know that rationing of care meant that a 95-year-old veteran with 3 types of cancer, 2 heart attacks, and 10 trips to the hospital by ambulance had to fight for a placement in a care facility. This government has no end of cash for its toxic American lean consultant, no end of cash for that pet project. Yet it has neglected seniors' care so badly that the thresholds to get into care are now so high that most seniors just don't qualify. To the minister, how can he possibly justify these mixed-up priorities?
When nurses are saying that patient safety is getting worse, when patients through the Health Quality Council are saying that patient safety is getting worse, Mr. Speaker, this minister ought to take note and this government ought to care. Patient safety, Mr. Speaker, and direct available time for patient care are absolutely critical to a high quality of health care. And both of these, patient safety and the time available for patient care, are getting worse under this government. And that ought to be a huge wake-up call for each and every member over there. John Black's version of lean is not helping, Mr. Speaker. In fact, it is hurting patient care and the quality of health care here in Saskatchewan. It's not acceptable, and that is why this government needs to pay attention and needs to change course. Speaker, when the government's very own statistics through the Ministry of Health show a record number of critical incidents, when we have nurses showing that only 1 out of 10 show that lean has improved patient care, that ought to be concerning. That minister ought to care. That government ought to pay attention and ought to change course, Mr. Speaker. But we see the opposite. We see them doubling down on John Black's version of lean, all at a time when all the indicators show that the quality of health care, the safety of health care is going in the wrong direction, Mr. Speaker.
We know that food bank usage has jumped by 20% in this province in the last year. And we know that the manager of the Prince Albert Food Bank says that food bank usage in that city has nearly doubled. Doubled in the last 2 years. And we know that almost half the people served by the PA Food Bank are children. The rising cost of living is putting a squeeze on too many families here in Saskatchewan. But this government has untold millions for American lean consultants and Japanese senseis, yet it sits on its hands when organizations that serve our most vulnerable people are forced to cut back on important services, Mr. Speaker. To the minister, how can she justify such misplaced priorities?
Margaret Warholm was in care at Santa Maria Seniors Home here in Regina, and she suffered terribly as a result, Mr. Speaker. Malnourished, broken bones, horrible pain, and awful, awful bed sores. I've seen the photo, Mr. Speaker, of Margaret's back, and it is absolutely shocking. It is appalling, Mr. Speaker, that a seniors' care facility would let that happen to somebody. It shows, Mr. Speaker, that Margaret was indeed neglected. It shows the horrible pain that she experienced as a result, and it is not in any way acceptable, Mr. Speaker. Margaret needed an assurance of a good quality of care, of clear minimum care standards, and of proper staffing. Margaret and her family were let down by the seniors' care system, and they were let down by this government. But it's not too late. It's not too late for the many other seniors who are in care today. To the Premier, what will it take? How many stories will it take for him to agree that we need clear, regulated minimum care standards for seniors' care?
The quality of seniors' care in our province is awful, and shockingly, the Health Minister has said there is nothing that the government is planning on doing this year to improve it. The only thing he keeps pointing to is the woefully inadequate one-time payment fund from last year. That's it. No commitment to anything new, despite the fact that seniors in care facilities are still not having their needs met. To the Minister, how is that remotely acceptable?
Saskatchewan steel fabrication businesses are still laying off workers because they just don't have enough work. They say a big part of the problem is that this government keeps giving contracts to companies from places like Ontario, Quebec, Texas, and California. Businesses have been pressuring this government for well over a year and a half, but they've received nothing but delays and excuses. We've listened to these businesses, and we've introduced legislation for a more sophisticated procurement policy to ensure fairness for Saskatchewan businesses and get better value for taxpayers. We're happy to work with government on this front. We're happy to discuss any amendments that they may want to propose. We just want a much better procurement policy in place this session. To the Minister, will he agree to work with us on that front, and can we get this done?
We've heard nothing but excuses from this government when it comes to a second bridge for Prince Albert. Nothing but excuses, Mr. Speaker. We believe that a second bridge is necessary, and we stand with the people of Prince Albert and the entire area in demanding a second bridge for Prince Albert.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people are still waiting for answers on this government's massive Boundary Dam project, which costs somewhere between $1.4 and $1.6 billion. The minister admitted last week that we don't own the technology, that we can't commercialize it, and that Alberta's Cenovus is paying only $25 per tonne for the captured carbon. So in light of that, my question is for the Sask Power Minister. What does he expect to be the net gains or losses over the next 30 years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the monthly hotel costs for John Black appear to be about $38,000 per month over the last couple of years. So that means we've probably spent another $266,000 on John Black hotel bills since March. In total, that's well over $1.2 million just for John Black's hotel bills. The gravy train, or in this case, Mr. Speaker, the gravy plane just keeps rolling over there. Right. To the minister, what's the total amount to date the taxpayers have paid to John Black for per diems and miscellaneous expenses?
Margaret's experience is not an isolated case. I hear these stories, Mr. Speaker, far too often, and it is incredibly frustrating to have a government that will not recognize that this is a widespread problem. Margaret's family believes, as do I, that we need minimum care standards which apply to all care facilities, province-wide, to ensure that this type of neglect stops. They're frustrated, Mr. Speaker, that this government removed minimum care standards instead of strengthening them. And I agree with Margaret's family, Mr. Speaker. This government should work with those on the front lines to develop a clear minimum level of care, with a base level of care with the standards associated with that. And those standards, Mr. Speaker, should apply province-wide. To the Premier, how can he possibly be opposed to clear minimum care standards? Why does he keep hiding behind extremely general guidelines that clearly are not working?
Hear, hear.
Yesterday, I reintroduced the Residents in Care Bill of Rights Act, which would require the government to implement clear, province-wide minimum care standards. To the Minister, will the government agree to pass the Residents in Care Bill of Rights Act? Yes or no?
I recognize the Minister of Health.